it's my backup plan, just in case anything happens. I feel like I have enough beadwork to sustain me for like income-wise, like a couple months.
Wait, because you're making the earrings?
No, my aunt is the one who beads most of my beadwork, or I find it at like powwows or gatherings and stuff. No, it's just that I have so much that I could sell so much of it and still have the time.
That's awesome.
Well, what's really cool is seeing what is it? The page on Facebook, the virtual powwow. And I'm not the social distance powwow group on Facebook.
Yeah. And
seeing all of the Indigenous creators from across the country showcase their work and beautiful work. And I just cannot believe the success I'm seeing in that, right? So it's been really cool to see, be able to shop, be able to support, and yeah.
You guys,
turn my phone off right now.
We're live.
Yeah.
We're live. Welcome to Ready to Talk. Hey, everyone out there in YouTube, Facebook, Twitter land, or wherever else you're from. I'm Shannon O'Loughlin. I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm the Chief Executive and Attorney for the Association on American Indian Affairs, who is bringing you YouTube Ready to Talk tonight. And with me, I've got my favorite, bestest co-host, Colleen. Colleen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Ani Bourgeau. Good evening, everybody. I'm Colleen Medicine, and I'm the program director with the association. And I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians, and I'm coming to you live from Anishinaabe territory in northern Michigan.
And our guest tonight is HALI McKELVIE, who is also a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. HALI, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
One correction, and we had it. You called it your Okie accent?
Did I do it wrong?
Yeah, it's okay.
HALI
McKELVIE.
Yeah. HALI McKELVIE. So let's all say it together. HALI McKELVIE.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, HALI. Sorry about that. I was saying it right all along, and then I got it wrong. Let's say hi to everyone who's out there. Please feel free to write in the chat. Tell us who you are, where you're coming from. I've got a wonderful picture of Sugar Island that's in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where these two wonderful women who are with us are from, up there in Michigan. And I am actually north of the head of the serpent. I'm in Maryland, just north of Washington, D.C. I guess the serpent is a little bit tamed, at least for a little while anyway. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. I won't get into that. How's everyone's week going?
This is any indication of how my week's been going.
Girl, I get it.
You know what? It's springtime though in Michigan finally. I don't know if it's springtime anywhere else, but we finally got up to the 50s this week, I think. So that's been good.
That's pretty warm.
Yeah, and up here, I know we're a ditch away from each other now, but up here in the Upper Peninsula, we are having an early spring, an even earlier spring than we were blessed with last year. So I hope that's a great indication of our summer. No snow, and it's green, and it's mid-April. To me, it's crazy.
And that it's going to be hotter than hell. And where I'm at in Maryland, it's already getting warm.
It's here this week though, so I don't know what it's doing. We had snow.
So Colleen, your audio sounds a little bit muffled. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Be sure you can use your camera mic. Maybe that's it. But I want us to give HALI a better introduction. HALI is the community outreach specialist for Uniting Three Fires Against Violence. And I'm going to share that website because it's really a great website. Make sure everybody knows who Uniting Three Fires Against Violence is. Before we get started, HALI, do you want to just tell us what does Uniting Three Fires Against Violence mean, and what type of work do you all do over there?
So actually, our name is derived from the Uniting Three Fires Against Confederacy, where the three bands here in Michigan, Ottawa, Chippewa, and Potawatomi came together in, a collection of interests for our regional and cultural protections. I'm not well versed in the full history. I do understand where the title of our agency comes from. So Uniting Three Fires Against Violence is actually funded through the Department of Justice and the Office of Violence Against Women as a tribal coalition to provide supports, whether it's technical assistance, education, training opportunity. And then on the flip side of that, we focus a lot as well on system change. And it's for the 12 federally recognized tribes here within the state of Michigan to help them enhance their supports and their collective responses in their respected communities to what's going on. So that's what we do. I do a lot of talking. And as a young girl, report cards where they say, your daughter spends too much time talking or chatting in class. I never thought I'd be able to get a job out of it. And here I am. So we really do focus on anything, though, that will come in or out of Indian country that impacts advocates, tribal law enforcement, prosecute, anything that will impact the systems in response. If it impacts the way someone's going to advocate for a survivor or somebody in the current trenches of abuse, whether that be stalking, DV, sexual assault. And we are working currently on a toolkit to share throughout the state of Michigan on the basic how-to, what to do when an MMIW or an MMIR case happens within our tribal communities. As we all know, there's a lot going on around the MMIW crisis, but because of our unique relationship with the United States government and our political status as Indian country and the jurisdictional issues that comes with that, it's not an easy, black and white fix. There's multidisciplinary responses, entities at the table from the federal, state, tribal, local levels. And so we are trying to produce something that's effective and honoring of all 12 tribes and those not only connected to tribes, but those disconnected and maybe in an urban setting or disconnected from their ancestral homelands as well.
Yes, I was testing you, HALI. I was going to see how long is she going to talk if I let her go. Since I started with your work, because I know you're so eloquent about the work and the advocacy that you do there. So let's back up a little bit and learn a little bit more about HALI. Colleen, is there anything you want to share about HALI or introduce her and embarrass her before we get started?
Oh, geez. What could I say about you, HALI? Well,
Girl,
our paths crossed, let's see, now in 2012, 2013?
15.
2015. Wow, Okay. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so
No, I'm sorry. 16.
16.
But I knew, right? It is true. I knew about you long before that. And what I want to say about HALI and what I would tell anyone if they asked me about you, I would say she's a fierce Anishinaabe Kwe who works on behalf of the people. That's what I would say. You spend a lot of time working out in community and doing really important work. And so that's what I would say if someone asked. But here, we met in 2016 through a play we were both actresses in a play, A Sliver of a Full Moon, which is actually about about VAWA, right? So
Yeah.
so we met because we were both actresses in a play. We were acting as women who helped pave the way for the reauthorization of VAWA.
Wow. Wow.
And Mary Catherine Nagel is the one who wrote Sliver of a Full Moon.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And what's super cool is I was actually in Oklahoma the first time that play premiered back, I want to say October 2013. And I was with UpFav, but I was on their board of directors at the time. And so to have that shared experience of I get to watch this woman's work in lifetime and the admiration and the stories that reflected all across Indian country collectively, and individually what they went through to collectively come together, that was cool. And then to actually be honored and part of that project here in the Sioux, and then where I officially met Colleen was quite an experience as well.
So should we start there on maybe we should go back a little bit, because I kind of know these stories from being in the same virtual rooms with the both of you. So HALI, so where did you grow up? Where do you come from?
Oh, so, well, I want to start off by saying Ani Buju, HALI McKELVIE Indigenous Cause, Nimki and Dodum, Bawating and Dunjaba. My name is HALI McKELVIE. I am Thunder Clan, and I do come from the place of the Rapids, located here in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, ancestrally, right? I was born and raised the first 10 years of my life out in Sacramento, California. And then my father, well, me, I love to stir up controversy. I was in fourth grade, and we were learning how to have pen pals. And I knew at my paternal grandmother's home that this grandpa that I had out there in Sault Ste. Marie, that everybody, not so much my grandpa, but they talked about the Sioux, right? And this place, this majestic place that the family came from and my grandma came from. And I found her address book and wrote my grandpa a letter and said, "Hey, I'm your granddaughter. I'm Pat's kid. How are you?" I don't remember exactly what was in there. Being 9 or 10 years old, I didn't think that he would write the consequence, and it wasn't a consequence. I didn't think that he would write back, and then what would lead to that. So at the time, or around the time of me reaching out, my paternal grandfather was diagnosed with cancer. And so that letter, little did I know, was a bridge to open up a relationship between my own father and his father after, a few decades, of disconnect. So my father comes to his hometown. He was born and raised here until he was 13 years old for the first time in over 20 years. And the mother who raised me, my stepmother, joined him. She's also from Sacramento. She had spent time in Wisconsin, prior to her relationship with my father, but she was a city girl. So they come out here and my mom's like, "What? This is where you're from?" They flew into Traverse City. So they got that really beautiful scenic drive from Traverse City, Michigan up to Mackinac City, crossing Mackinac Bridge into the upper, they call it God's country. So up into the Upper Peninsula. And they're like, "Okay, we're done. We are moving our kids out of the city, out of the hood. We're going to come." And there was opportunity. We were tribal members. So I always heard that. I always heard I was Native American. I always heard that this majestic place of Sault Ste. Marie. But, I was the first 10 years of my life. And I did spend some time up in Coos Bay, Oregon as well. I will say, in my first grade, it was first grade, and I remember it specifically because my biological mother, had this really cool burgundy quilt, and I would use it as if it was buffalo hide. And I was, going and skinning, and I was assimilating at the time. I didn't know what assimilation was. I was just taking what I was being educated. But so Oregon, in that very small memory I have as being like a 6-7-year-old girl compared to what we learned in California, was lies. So it was more authentic and a little more truthful in the small spurt there in Oregon. But in California, you know, there was Spaniards, there was settlements, there was the fight with North America, with Mexico, and land claims and all of that I'm not totally well versed in. So please don't take me as an expert, but just the thimble knowledge I know from the first 10 years. So we, and the gold rush, right, in the gold country.
Right.
So what I had learned about natives were essentially we were savages, that we were the killers, we were scalpers, we lived in teepees, we were not nice to the white man, we like just every negative stereotype. And then at that time in media that I can recall, and it was old, like by the time in the early 90s when I'm coming to, you know, in elementary school, I know this was an old commercial then, but it was the Native man who ended that PSA about pollution and garbage and how, and so other than that, and like Tonto and just whatever stereotypes that were force fed to us through those channels, that's all I knew. So when my dad's like, hey, we're moving 8 kids across country to our reservation, I'm like, cool, we're gonna go live in a freaking teepee. Like we're Native. So that's what I thought we were. We were Native. We would have horses. I didn't even know like horses weren't necessarily indigenous to our country. Like, cool. Like we're going to go have these real true Thanksgivings, like whatever that representation in my mind at 10 years old was no, we had running water. We had actual houses. We had roads. We had electricity. And then I find out teepees aren't even regionally reflective of Ojibwe people, right? So, and I thought every Indian was the same, every indigenous person, every native, that I didn't understand bands. I didn't understand region. I didn't understand anything. Again, it was just very surface and shallow of what I had known. And the reality was very different, right? But I remember.
Yeah, so you had the public education model, right?
Yeah.
You had what everyone else in America had.
Yes.
And until you came home.
Until I came home, yes.
Yeah. But that's so interesting to me that it doesn't matter who you are. If that's what you're subject to, if you're subject to settler colonialism and the public education model, that's exactly what you think about Native Americans, because the education about Native Americans stops in 1900. So
Yes.
Of course, everything, we're in the past, we don't exist, or we exist in this kind of
tokenism, majestic.
Curtis Switzer. You know, that's it.
Sorry, I just don't know where I put my soda. Oh, there we go. My pop. I don't know why. Probably because I'm talking about Sacramento, so I just called it soda, but I have to remember it's pop, and I get shamed out here if I say soda. And I don't even say soda like I used to. I say it with that Upper Peninsula, you know, dialect of like about. Sometimes it comes out about, but I like it.
It's like the Upper Canadian accent all in one.
You know, again, ignorance, right? So until I really traveled into the heart of the west end of the Upper Peninsula, we have like Escanaba and the Moonlight, you know, all these emphasis on our Upper Peninsula dialect. I have not. It was only about 6-7 years ago, and I believe I was on the border of Wisconsin. And I was like, oh man, you guys have the accent, not us. Like I didn't realize the more west you went into our dense rural, very beautiful. I love the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Very fortunate that my ancestral ties are to this area and that we had the opportunity to move here and exist and live. But yeah, those accents, man, they trip you up sometimes. So yes.
So how was school and your public education there different than what you had in Sacramento?
Oh, girl. First off, okay, so I lived in many areas of Sacramento. There's the city of Sacramento, and then there's like, you know, I wouldn't call Rio Linda, California. It's not a subdivision, but that's still home. In my heart of hearts, Rio Linda, half of me will always, the first that imprinted on me, because that's where my California roots, come from, both maternally and paternally. So, but we lived in South Sacramento. We lived in Rio Linda, just different parts of Sacramento, Del Paso Heights, the hoods, right? Like, I can't say that I'm a hood girl again, but so that had an impression. So coming from Sacramento to the Sioux into the res, we were enrolled in JKL balloting school. And at the time when I was enrolled, my son goes there. It's now it's a PSA. It's a charter school, but my first year or two there, it was still an Indigenous sovereign school, very sovereign. So I got to learn in my first year of what it meant to be Anishinaabe. We would open up every Monday morning with like a opening ceremony. And then on Friday afternoons, we would close with a closing ceremony. So that was where a huge part of my introduction to the Anishinaabe way of life, Ojibwe way of life, came to be. And we had a lot of players in our community at the time. And I just looked at them with awe. And part of me was shocked. And I mean this in the utmost respect, but it was nice. I was like, these are real. Like, Indians are real. And I'm part of this. It's not just it's not just this historical context. And they're loving, and they speak with soft tone, and they speak this language that I don't understand. And I've been around many languages I had not understood. But I had a sense of what resonated inside of me. I remember it was beautiful in that first year in the education setting, not even talking about the extracurriculars that we had provided to us. And I don't know if curriculars or extracurriculars, but our culture that was provided to us in such a natural, woven into our day-to-day way. Mm-hmm. So educationally, I had this teacher named Adele Easterday. And I don't believe she would recognize or remember me today. I didn't stand out. But the way she taught the War of 1812 and the way that she talked about Columbus and the way that she refused to wear green on St. Patrick's Day and she showed up in orange, and the way that she captivated us, as at least for me, and I want to disclaim, I should have said that these are my personal reflective experiences. I do not represent anyone other than myself in this conversation. I can't speak to my tribe. I can't speak for all Indian country, all tribes, all bands, pueblos, so forth. So just to get that out there. And anything I say, please know my intention's full of respect. But the way that Miss Easterday taught was captivating to me. And at this time, I think this is where ADD and a few things that went unnoticed were starting to pop up in my life. So she was a very hands-on, animated, in your face, she was just a tough woman. She still is. She's still in the community. I've seen her and I'm always like, hi, but I know you don't know me, but I respect you so much. So that was my introduction there. And of course we had like math, science, all the other standard requirements for general education at that time. But then we also had Mrs., I believe first name Elizabeth Shaw. And I believe she was First Nations, or if not had ties to First Nations across the river. So I live in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and I am separated by a political, border, by a border. And at one point I know, because actually I know my ancestors emigrated from Cree Nation over here to the Upper Peninsula. I know that we didn't see borders at one point in time. And so Mrs. Shaw was this beautiful elder woman who taught our Ojibwe language class. So we had that part of our, I think 2 to 3 times a week. She was phenomenal as well. And, looking back, she was teaching a lot of rough kids. These adults were responding to the traumas that we were living through and existing and owning and not knowing it was trauma and not knowing anything other than what we were living at the time. So reflecting back to 25 years ago in that space, God, these teachers put up with so much. We were disrespectful brats. But what she did, she was a very tough cookie. But she had a way of she spoke the language beautifully. She shared it with us. looking back and knowing the history I do today of our people, and let alone since 1492, and assimilation and colonization and the boarding school era and all the laws and all of the consecutive policies and orders that have happened while simultaneously we were continuously from so many avenues of attack on Indigenous people, and understanding that today, and knowing that I too have somebody two generations separated from me who was in the boarding school system here in Harbor Springs, Michigan. Like, now that I know all of these and why and how these happen, like, my respect for these people. Miss Lori King, she wants me to call her Lori. It's so hard, but Miss King is a teacher who was local here in the Sioux, and she was with me during my time at JKL Ballotine. And then she was with me at my time when I was a brat, an awful twat in high school at our alternative, where I was like, I got boobs, I'm a grown-ass woman, like, no one can tell me otherwise. I went and spent a year in Sacramento with my paternal grandmother. And so I came back like, I'm from the, like, you know, just this weird persona, and you're 14, 15, and you're just figuring, I was surviving at the time. I didn't know I was surviving. But again, knowing what I know today about trauma and everything that my family went through in the early 2000s, and why I went to Sacramento for a year with my beautiful grandmother, Myrna. I don't know if she's watching. If she has grams, I love you. Shout out to her, because she is a huge reason why I'm here. And as are my aunties. I have like 20 aunties from all sides of my family, and I have some real strong women in my life who have who've given me a lot more chances than I think I needed and deserved at times. But back to this whole education and everything. These mentors, I had these mentors, and whether they knew they were mentors to me or not, I don't know. But I just had these really strong women no matter where I went. So I want to give a little backup. I was raised primarily by, quote unquote, my stepmother. And in my family, there's no step. It is what it is. I call her by her first name even to this day. But at 3 years old, she said, hey, like, you have a mom. We don't want to hurt your mom's feelings. So you can either call me Julie or Julie Mom. And at some point, it just became Julie Mom, trailed off to Julie. So where I'm going with that is I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
No, I think you were going to start getting into your mom.
Okay, and I think I was tying into like the strong women around me. Yeah. So for whatever reasons, and the reasons I fully 100% understand today, my biological mother didn't raise me. So my father gained full custody, and a year in, or a few months into my life, like, my mom left when I was a newborn, an infant. And so he met my stepmother, Julie, who primarily has raised me. I think I was like 6 months old, and they've been together since. And so what she brought and everything there, and my dad being, he was a single father at this time to 3 kids. My aunts played a big part. My paternal aunts played a huge part, as did my biological maternal aunts, as did moving here and meeting. So a whole other thing of this whole Sacramento to Michigan. My paternal grandfather was a busy man. So his first wife, he had 7 children with her. And then when he remarried and he stayed here locally, he had 7 more children. So I inherited like this whole other huge set of family. And then like my biological mom came, she's one of 10 kids. So, the whole huge family unit that we see, and the cousins and the aunties and the kinship, maybe not biological kinship, but community-based kinship, and what that represents in our culture, that was already actively in my life. Due to family friends, I had aunts and uncles who were just very good family. So that was never a foreign concept to me. So there was a lot of things that transferred from Sacramento to the Sioux that were already normal. And unfortunately, reservation life too, it was definitely externally different. Our community was quite different. I had never lived in a place where it snowed up to 6 months a year, which was really cool as a kid though. for sure, because you're coming from like hot pavement, cement, brown, dead flowers by like June, July, so the environment itself was gorgeous. I didn't realize though that the feds gave our land here, our housing site on a swamp here in Sault Ste. Marie, but I did appreciate it in my youth. That was my playground, was swamp land, where my res based. So all of these like cultural community based behaviors that we do see within tribal communities were there in my life. But what I wasn't prepared for was the external difference. But what really sadly helped me adapt and survive, because it was a hard transition. I was the new kid on the block and I was cocky. I was from Sacramento. Like I was a dweeb. I loved like bebop or, all the girly teenage posters and Devon Sawa, and of course like really good radio station music that we didn't have access to here. But like at the end of the day, I was a 10-year-old girl, right? So I'm just trying to emulate like what I had seen in my one environment coming into this new environment, and I wasn't shit. So the res kids did not necessarily take to me fast. It took a few months, and it was really, really hard because I had moved a lot as a young girl in Sacramento, and I had it counted out at one point, but I had moved a lot and I had switched schools a lot. But our last place we lived prior to coming here, we definitely had been there like 2 to 3 years. So there was longevity, there was consistency. We weren't far from grandma. I wasn't far at all from my grandmother, who played a huge part in my life, especially during that time. And especially when my mother left when I was an infant, my grandma really took on that role of that maternal protection and love. And so it was just a really hard transition out here. But the one thing that I quickly learned, the oppression, the depression, substance abuse, which I didn't know was not normal at the time, but I was able to see it in ways that didn't mimic Sacramento, but I knew what it was and it was comfortable. So I was already desensitized to like trauma and unhealthy environments and all these things. And I found comfort in that as a child, knowing that, okay, homes don't look the same. The grass is always green if it's not snowing here. There was just so much for a child to like reclaim. And then like, I'm Indian, and what does this mean to be Indian and Native? And so excited to like, I'm in the school that's teaching me this way of life that it's not like a special presentation that comes in, like quarterly or something. Like this is a way of life within the school system. And to have that, to have the community that kind of reflects that, but to know that there is some sadness there, I could never reconcile that. But you accept it.
Yeah, and how do you reconcile that? Because that exists even in the most healthy environments where we're communicating and we're constantly, I was having this conversation with Colleen this week. It's been a really weird week for me. And we were having this conversation about, we are involved in work that is constantly hitting triggers for historic trauma. We're constantly fighting against the things that cause trauma. If you just look at repatriation, we're constantly fighting against museums and institutions who feel they have a right to own our ancestors and sacred objects. It's constant, you battle with, and I finally come to the realization at 53 that depression is just something that I'm going to have and that's going to be with me and can manage, because we constantly have to do that to be good advocates, right? So it's this weird, it's hard to reconcile the wonderful stuff we're doing and the advocacy we're doing with the shit that comes with it, right?
Okay, if we're going there, girl, we're going there, because I got shit to say on that as well. Yeah, so you're very, very true. And so I know, like, in framework of, like, my focus of advocacy is always the disproportionate rates of violence perpetrated against tribal communities. And what does that look like? And it's not some generic term. It's not just a mission statement. It's a way of life, and it's a way of reclamation. But in order to understand my position of being in this reclamation self-determination era, I need to understand what I'm reclaiming. And I didn't know that for a long time. I lived it, like the subsidiary, the tokenism, the stereotypes of what it meant to be Native. But I didn't understand, how did we become a stereotype? How did this culture become tokenized? Why do we have a casino? Why do we have all of these things? Why do we have our own law enforcement? We had tribal PD very present on our res. And I knew it was different than the city I lived in, their police force. I knew it was different than the sheriff's department, but I just thought it was cool. We had like we called them res cops. I mean, I know a lot of people do, but like coming from the hood where you either have like the sheriff or you have like the city PD or you have helicopters and you're hearing gunshots, like it really was greener pastures out here environmentally. And I always knew that, right? But I didn't understand like why we had our own things. And even as I got older and I had my first child at 15, I've been a single mom since I was 15. And I wear that with a badge of honor because realistically, motherhood's messy and hard. I have not been the best mother. I've had many, we may get into that, we may not, but I do wear it as a badge of honor because you know what? I'm not supposed to be here, let alone that child, right? Regardless of my ACEs score or mental health or this and that, I'm HALI, I'm three-dimensional. And going back to accepting that you have depression and the reality and that intersect of the real trauma that we're surviving and living, and then the work that we do and the advocacy that we do to reclaim, to revitalize, to have the resiliency, it's exhausting. And so my line of work has been the victim, the criminal, the atrocities that happen to us as women. First off, as women, like I hate that I've been reduced to having a vagina or hysterics or boobs or this or that because they don't see us as three-dimensional. And I didn't realize I was born into a machine that had centuries of that. And that is what happened here. Now, prior to 1492, I don't think everything was 100% perfect, but it wasn't this, and it wasn't the intention. I think there were, we had order. We had law and order that reflected us as sovereign nations and bands. We had way of life. We didn't have things forced upon us. We were able to exist and practice these traditions and our culture as if. And then when 1492 came and that first point of contact, and then what came after was someone else's ideals, someone else's religion, someone else's classism, elitism, and standards of what a man and a woman should be. And we've all been born into those realities since. So though I'm one of 6 daughters, I'm one of many women across multi-generations, both Widener, McKelvie side of my identity. I've been reduced to being a woman so many times, and the stereotypes that, or a stupid girl, or a little girl, or a silly girl, or women have hormonal issues, and that's a brunt to carry. So this is
angry. Are you angry? It's okay. Calm down.
Sometimes I think I am. Like when I get talking about
that's what I don't know how many times I've got that. It's okay. It's okay.
Oh, yes. You're not calling. See, I'm so used to being called angry that I think you're telling me I'm angry.
No, that's the shit that we get sometimes. Yeah.
So even like last night, I'm in the clinic with my kid at our tribal health clinic. Very great practitioner. We had a COVID exposure. My son's in quarantine because of that. We had some symptoms that mirrored COVID, so we went to get tested. It's the flu. Thank God. We had further testing done, got results were negative today. But that being said, the practitioner who walked in was a male. And I'm like, well, you've seen me nervous, Shannon. So I'm like amped up thinking we have COVID, that we're going to die. How am I like, who do I have to contact? All of these things. How am I going to keep my one son who hasn't had the exposure safe from the rest of like just whatever is on my plate as a mom and then a mom prepping to be a mom to a sick kid with this illness, right? So he walks in and he's like, "Are you anxious?" And I felt really like, oh God, okay, I'm going to be reduced to like a mental illness again and not HALI. Like I'm going to be reduced to a file. What's in a file? And I'm like, I'm very anxious. And then he said, okay, but listen, let me talk to you. So I listened. He talked to me. He goes, everyone's anxious. It's okay. I just wanted to make sure, like, what I'm dealing with, what's going on here. Are we okay? Do you need more support? But the minute he said, are you anxious? I go back to when a doctor said, oh, you're not having heart palpitations. You have this going on with you, and it's a mental illness. And I'm like, I'm HALI. I've been living with this my whole life. The chemical imbalances started in the womb. Like, can you look at me as a three-dimensional person rather than the stigma of mental health? Can you look at me as somebody who might have a broken wing right now, or who might just need help elsewhere? So the angry, everything. So all of these burdens with identity are carried in my life, right? And then it amps up, excuse me. Going back to this whole point of why I'm talking about womanhood and deduction, but you hit the nail on the head with the trauma and the trauma that goes on as we do this work. And there are triggers every day. Mm-hmm. I'm trying my best to minimize those triggers. I've gone through some traumatic shit in my life, to be frank, and I felt very strong. And then there was an event that occurred 3 years ago that just really knocked me off my rocker. And I'm going to be honest, struggling since with anxiety and depression and race and identity and people who are close to me. Okay, now I need to back up. I'm sorry, before I even touch that whole thing. So I want to go back to my identity. So I move here. I think, like, holy crap, I'm Indian. I'm Native American. Like, I'm Tonto. Like, I knew I wasn't Tonto because he was male, but like all these stupid, horrible things that we were taught. And I'm taught otherwise. I'm exposed to culture. I'm exposed to the four sacred medicines. What does it mean to smudge? What does cedar represent to an Anishinaabe and what benefactors does that medicine carry specifically for women? And what does it mean to have a moon time, and our reference to our menstrual cycles? And how do we take care of ourselves? And how do you pray? And so I got a lot of the basic 101 through my exposure of JKL balloting, but also through my community, through my res, and through my friendships. The Matriarch sisters, I had some of the best times with these young girls who we were kids, and all what they offered me was acceptance. I mean, I was always like, haha, the white girl, like 3 Indians and a white girl. That was kind of like our slogan. But like they brought me into the fold and said, all right, like this is what it means to smudge. This is what it means. Here, I'm going to bring you to drum practice. I didn't have the best experience at this one particular drum practice. Someone saw me as this blonde-haired, white-skinned person. I was asked to leave. That stayed with me. That imprinted with me. And it took me a long time to get comfortable in certain cultural and traditional spaces. But ironically, I was super comfortable in like all the traumatic, like bad spaces of my community where like smoking the cigarettes, and then you up that to other levels of behavior, risky, at risk, behavior and consequences to that. Right. So I knew that was like a subsidiary of my community. But I also took ownership because I was raised around drug addicts and alcoholics. So I glamorized everything that DARE told you not to. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to turn 18 to go work at my casino, which I'm grateful. I'm not knocking that, because that Coing casino on that reservation and other gaming sites has provided a lot of stability for community members. But I didn't know I wanted more. All I wanted was that casino. And it wasn't because, I'm 18, I can get a gaming license here with my tribe. I can do this and make money for myself and my son. It was, I get to be in a casino. I get to be a bartender. I get to be around this. And it just only amplified my appeal to the dark, dangerous things of life. And so that was a standard that was set. But by example, the catch-22 of it all is the drunks and drug addicts I was raised by are some of the most smartest, surviving. I mean, these people have survived. They may hustle. It may, socially, politically correct, look one way or put. These people know how to survive, and that's in our DNA. And I'm not trying to make a generic connection here, but survival truly and resiliency truly is. So I'm very grateful for my upbringing and the exposures. And even, I'm a survivor of child sex abuse on multiple levels. I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. But for all of those things to have happened to me have positioned me to have this experience both externally and spiritually that's autonomous to me. And it helps me understand some struggles that I didn't know in 1996. Why wasn't I accepted into that drum practice? Why was I asked to leave? I wasn't being disrespectful. I mean, going back, I know I was raised around Catholic religion, the formative years of my life. I'm not a great Catholic. I'm not even going to touch that debate other than I understand today that religion is foreign to Indigenous people. We had a way of life, and that was stolen from us and perpetrated with. But that's as far as I will talk on that out of respect and things that I don't even quite understand in my own way. But spiritually, I was taught, though, through the church how to be respectful and obedient, but it wasn't, it was a desire. There was something that resonated with me when I heard that drum. Was it a little invasive? And I had never heard traditional drumming or singing, and it was a shock to me, but something resonated inside my little soul. And I knew, at the utmost, I have to be as respectful as I can be and can contain myself to be. But I tried around, in the early years of my community to be exposed to culture. And that's why I referenced the Matria sisters. They shared with me what they knew. They gave me teachings, and that as kids, I didn't know if we knew they were teachings. And as an adult, I have sought them out to confirm what I've believed for the last 25 years of my life to be fruitful or honest or the way it was, and to be proven that and shared and taught that they were. So though I wasn't really brought in to the cultural fold right away, and that one experience imprinted upon me in such a way that it scared me. So I would respectfully always attend our social powwows and things that I felt were fair game, fair game of access. And I lived half a mile from our powwow grounds. And okay, hold on. I'm the worst person to have a conversation with, but I want to share the first powwow experience I had. It was the 4th of July powwow of 1997 up here in Sault Ste. Marie. And I remember when they must have been doing a sunrise or a water, something early in the morning, and I heard the drum from my home. And then all weekend, okay, and this is back in the day, when the Sioux Tribe 4th of July powwow, there wasn't a lot of other powwows to compete with or opportunity in other communities. I think it was a hot spot at the time. So on my part of the res, we would get cars just all over the tribal roads, right? But that whole weekend, hearing the beauty of the music, and I didn't know these were prayers. No one taught. I just knew that it was something resonated deep within my soul. And but I was always the white girl, so I only had to appreciate it in the school context. And then when powwows came around, because I wasn't intimidated to be in a gathering space where multiple people were, but something told me, something imprinted with me in that one experience that for a long time disconnected me from, I blocked myself from access. But my parents were very respectful to the culture, but they were in their 30s, 40s at this time. And we didn't know what we didn't know. And by association and by proxy of my community. And they say, we become products of our communities or environments, right? Which is true. And so externally outside of the home, what I was exposed to taught me so much, but really it goes back to these sisters who were in the same age as I, who, with all love and respect, they gave me so much in my youth that the older I get, the more value and appreciation I have for that. So
can we talk a little bit about The idea of being the white girl. Because,
I hate that. Yes.
On one hand, being Native, well, even the term Indian, that's a legal term. The term Indian is a legal term of art now, right? It's a legal term. It has a specific meaning. Tribe has a specific legal meaning, and they're all related to the political relationship, right, between tribal nations and the federal government.
Yeah.
And who we are and who we've always been has been based on community and relationship. It wasn't based on, from what I understand, on skin color, but yet, settler colonialism brought with it racism.
Yes.
And today it's in our communities, even though you hear, some people say, well, where's your heart? But then you see them over there acting differently about and treating people differently depending on their shade. And so there's a lot of lateral violence in our communities, right?
Girl. Yes. So we talk about like internalized misogyny and internalized oppression, but do we talk ever about internalized lateral violence? Now, before I go further, I want to be very clear. I'm not the victim. Like I'm not going to sit here and cry foul for being the white girl, because I understand I'm a product of assimilation. I'm a product of colonization. This is the result they wanted, and they wanted to wipe us out. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, pity me, because that's not my intent. But can we talk about that? Because I internalized lateral violence for so long, and I didn't know what lateral violence was. To me, it felt very race-based as a child. And that was not a great feeling. And I got humbled through the true education of what has happened to Indigenous people from the beginning of time, from that point of contact, right? And I was able to connect what happened with all these different points in time. And a lot of my focus or expertise is legal, of what in the major legal. I know there's like on the federal level across Indian country and sovereignty. And I know when we get on the state territory side, there's a lot of stuff there, removals, land purchases, agreements between settlers and bands. And I won't speak to that, but understanding what the policy and the huge umbrella did to us, it's all created by design. And I didn't know that blood quantum was not Indigenous to us. I didn't know that that was introduced on behalf of BIA in the ongoing attacks of genocide against us. So I didn't even know that until probably 5-6 years ago. And slowly I've been educated and learning about what happened. Let's go back to just 43 years ago, the American Indian Freedom Act, right? Where it sounds, first off, we didn't even have religion, right? Like I just said that, but like we didn't even have religion. So how are they giving us this is their lens. We had culture, we had a way of life. That was it, right? So like the reality of that they're giving us back our way of life, which is sadly what happened, because up until that point, they had stripped us. We couldn't practice our ceremony. We couldn't smudge. We couldn't have social gatherings with a drum. We couldn't have powwows of fear of being federally prosecuted. So we lost so much in that era, right?
Yeah.
So that's only 4 decades ago that we've only been allowed to openly and socially accepted as practicing that. So I had to understand that. And then let's go back to the same year where the Oliphant first Suquamish case went down, where so understanding and internalizing what happened with Mr. Oliphant and how he argued that he was not a citizen of the Suquamish tribe, that this tribe had no inherent right as blah, blah, blah. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And then finally the Supreme Court was like, yeah, you're right. You know what? Tribal law has no impact on non-citizens of their nations.
So in Oliphant, so do you know the story? If I'm remembering correctly, the story is a non-Indian, right?
Yep.
Driving his car, hit a tribal police car.
Yes.
On res, right? So caused damage, caused harm on tribal land.
Yes.
And the Supreme Court held that basically tribes are not competent enough, are inferior. Our laws are inferior, and we can't criminally prosecute a non-Indian for damage that's caused on Indian lands. And then that has created this screwed up federal criminal jurisdiction that never gets, things never get prosecuted because the feds won't prosecute anything.
We can talk about that too, girl.
All right.
No,
I
that's
was just
true.
wanting to make sure people understood the case in Oliphant. And what was it? Was it 1970 something?
Okay. I didn't know there was more beyond the 70s, right? Like early on in my career, I knew we were responding to trauma. I knew for whatever reason the violence was being perpetrated against us, but I was still from that westernized lens. I still had not fully understood what had happened. But to go back to the point of being like the white girl. So I lived it up. I ate that shit up. Like it was fun. It was like, haha. At some point it was funny and fun, but on a true deep level, I was internalizing that same concept. I saw myself as less than, and I saw myself as different than those within my tribal community. And at some point I chose to believe that I was, and I don't blame anyone for that. I will say being exposed to trauma and having traumatic events up until that point in my life had already conditioned me to think of less than of myself, to already think that I wasn't equal to, or that I wasn't whole, or something inherently is just so wrong with me. Because when we internalize other people's trespasses and abuses against us, we don't say, oh, the bad guy is the bad guy. It's somehow I caused this. I'm the bad guy. But you know what? 3 years old when you're molested, how the hell are you the bad guy? At 10 years old, when you're physically assaulted by a community, like these aren't things, but we don't talk about those taboo isms of that part of trauma either, right? And it's very hard. But so I socially played it up, and I felt very protected by my social circle of who I was around. I felt we were all kids, kind of like the blind leading the blind, but in some altruistic state, I just always had this trust with the specific group. So sometimes it was fun. Sometimes as I got older, it was not fun, because then I started being exposed to other communities and other community members, and seeing what they went through, and not understanding why they hated what I thought was hate, what I interpreted as hate, as white people. And here I am, is it The Jerk with Steve Martin, but it's vice versa, where he's raised by a Black family and goes out. So here I am, this jerk, hey, I'm Native. I understand because the basis of their skin color yet fully, and because of the status of being Indian, and the stereotypes of free healthcare and free education, and all that's just I didn't understand all of these things yet, and I didn't understand how they represented and how they presented, and I didn't know that a lot of us didn't know the same things. To sum that up, so my experience as being the light-skinned white girl Native to this day is something I have to work through. My identity is something I'm learning that is mine, because I have. Going back to, this was before I was active sexually. Namin shared with me a story about burying uteruses when you give birth as Ojibwe women, and what that teaching meant, and why we have that teaching, and what it represents to the infant.
I hope you don't really mean burying uteruses, right? You mean burying the afterbirth, right?
Afterbirth, yes. Oh, yes, gosh. It's been a minute.
The placenta,
yes. You know what's funny is I know, yes.
I was over here shaking my head yeah.
Bury the uteruses.
Bury the uterus.
If I ever have to bury the uterus, I know I will, but no, yes, I'm sorry, the placenta, the afterbirth. And so I was 15 when I was pregnant with my son, PJ, and I found out on the eve of Easter, and I gave birth Christmas Day. So there was some spiritual sense based off like my Catholicism, everything. There was something that resonated spiritually with me there as well at 15. So I was like, okay, I know struggles are to come, but this is a sign that something, just with the teachings I got from there. And so I had asked my father, hey, if I wanted to have my placenta buried, and this is why, would you do this? And my dad was like, yeah. And we asked, don't put it in to preserve it. Don't put it in formaldehyde. There's a separate bag they can do. It's dead of winter. My wonderful father, he went and buried the placenta from the pregnancy with PJ under our tree on the res. And then I just drove by that res house, side note, and the tree's gone, but it's okay. But someone very close to me at that time said, you're not even you don't even behave like an Indian, and this is what you're going to do. And I remember the insult, and I couldn't protect it because I didn't feel I could defend myself with that statement, but I knew inherently in who I was and what I wanted and what that teaching represented to me, and having this infant in my womb, and I'm becoming a young mother. And I wish it was as clean and beautiful as I'm reiterating it. It wasn't, because I was 15, that's what it is. But all of the symbolism of it, I just couldn't believe the disrespect, but I couldn't even protect myself against that. But this is created by design to minimize and to dehumanize and to disrespect our culture and our identities. So I've always had this internal struggle of is this imposter syndrome? Is this not? But then in the last 10 years specifically, when I've learned about the atrocities that have happened to us and the policies and the stripping of babies, and even prior to the boarding school era, what Richard Pratt did with his prisoner of wars, and what was done to Native women in the training, and the stereotypical story of Pocahontas, and learning the truth about her, and that wasn't even her God-given name. That was not her first name. It was a name given, a nickname, meant something like Jesterus girl or something like that. But they protected her. They did not give the settlers her real name. I just learned this. But okay, so it's been this huge educational lesson in understanding, wait a minute. So you're fucking telling me this is all genocide? I'm not supposed to be here. And then I go back into I'm educated on a Declaration of Independence, where that is rooted in the foundation of America's fucking founding fathers. We are merciless, savage Indians. We're not equal. This is not for all mankind or all men and subject to. So this is deep rooted in our history. And then learning that in America, in the United States, only 2% of our whole population is Native American, but we have competing rates, if not the higher rates of violence perpetrated against Native women and children and girls compared to any other minority in our country. At 2% of the population, I was in my office. It was Sexual Assault Awareness Month 2012. I knew there was high rates of violence. I had that secret that I think every woman, if not every other woman in America today has. I had that secret notion of knowing that a lot of women in my life had been sexually abused. I hadn't realized yet that had been the norm, and that these systems had been covering up. And I'm using sexual assault just as an example, because we can copy and paste this to other forms of power and control and the hierarchy. But I had not known yet that we were the highest rate of victimization when it came to domestic and sexual abuse. And I remember going into my boss's office, jaw dropped, and she's like, you didn't know this? She's like, yeah. Why do you think we have the special focus on this? Why do you think we have funding for this? And then let's fast forward that story. Probably a couple months later, I remember saying, I understand these things that have happened, but I don't blame my non-tribal neighbor for what they've done to me. So can we get over it? I'm glad I made that error, because she said to me, girl, she didn't say it like that, but she pretty much was like, get your ass to your computer, do a Google search, come back and talk to me. And upon that search and upon that education and really understanding sovereignty at that, just learning sovereignty at that point, really, I think that's when I really sat down to understand. I knew what autonomy meant and I knew what self-governance meant, but I had never put it in that historical context of what in a linear fashion and design, what was perpetrated and occurred against Indian country. And then I learned about the boarding school eras. And then I connect that I have, like I said, a relative. I don't want to identify out of respect because I didn't get permission to share in this huge space. But someone 2 generations separated from me went to Holy Childhood down in Harbor Springs, Michigan, and the impact that may have had on their life and the generational cycles. So then I'm starting on a very minute Lego from ignorant as with a thumb up my butt, saying things that I should have never said, to getting educated on this huge level, to finally internalizing and breaking it down in relation to my own family. So I'm like, oh my God, okay, this is where the intergenerational trauma comes in. This is why Uncle so-and-so's this and Auntie this and great uncle and great grandpa. It became real. And I can't hit every point, but it became real. It became personal. And I started understanding my own trauma. I started understanding the journey to my own identity. I started to understand what the fuck was going on in my own community and how and why we operate. And once I was able to connect those dots, that's when my mouth opened and said, this is not okay. I'm not the only advocate. I'm not the best advocate for Indian country. I have been very fortunate in my position to educate those who engage and work within tribal communities or outside of tribal communities. I have been very fortunate and I'm very grateful for the experiences of the last 13 years of my career and what it's healed in me, but what it's challenged, but what it's taught me. But once I was able to make the historical relationship into my immediate family and then the few generations above, that's when my game changed. And then that's when I learned I am a result of colonization. I am the product that they wanted. They never wanted us to know our status. They wanted us to go away. They wanted our land to profit from whatever the hell they were running away from. And we're still responding to monarchies and dramas and all of this status quo.
Yep.
That changed my life.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was just going to say they wanted us to keep killing each other.
Yes.
Yeah. They killed us until it got to a point where they taught us how to kill one another.
Yeah. I was just reminded when you were talking about boarding school 2 years ago at the repatriation conference in Arizona. I believe there was a presentation, and I think it was from NABS. I think it was a NABS presentation.
Yeah.
And the quote.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Christine McLeaf from NABS.
Yes. The quote she said was, in essence, Native people are professional mourners.
Girl.
And it, like, I don't know what it did in my mind or in my heart, but I have never forgot that. And every time I, like, in the lifetime exposure to trauma that you're talking about, it happens across the board in Indian country. And I'm, like, always thinking about that. Like, we are professional mourners. And it plays back into what you were talking about earlier with, trauma and depression and lateral violence and all of this. It's just designed by, it's not by accident. It's all part of the design,
Exactly. And Shannon, I could talk to myself about this stuff for hours. So
no, this is good. Keep talking, HALI. This is a conversation.
Yeah. So no, it's just okay. So I want to go back to the whole uterus actually after birth. Thank you for that. Don't even know my own anatomy. I've had so many people challenge me. I've had ex-partners say, you're white. You're not Native. You have a career because you got a tribal card and you guys have your casino. Like, that is what has been just thrown out at me. And socially, there have been times, and not with any of the names, like my friendships I've identified, but socially, I've had people who are present way more darker than I do, and who are obviously Native American, right? Or Indigenous, I interflop with the terminology, sorry, but I've had them get upset and then reject me and say, you know, you're just a white girl. You're an imposter. And so the shame and guilt that comes with that, because it's like, I didn't know, you know what I didn't know where that came from, but I just knew I had really white skin and really blonde hair. So what they're saying must be true. Right. And so to, again, reconcile that, and then years later have it connect to what I've been taught and what I've been learned, or what I've been learning on. And it's disheartening. It's very disheartening, because I don't think I'm the only one. And again, I'm not saying this for pity. Like, I'm not saying this I have best friends who have targets on their backs because of the way they look. I have friends who are aging into grandmotherhood, nokomishood, and they got to protect that third generation of theirs, of daughters and granddaughters. I have seen so many atrocities of the romanticization or the sexualization or the mystification of what it means to be a brown or a black woman in America. I have lived in those communities and probably on an unconscionable level played part into those stereotypes myself. Granted, I was a child, so I don't take too much guilt and shame with that there, but it's a truth. It's a truth. We're seeing where we are in this unique position in 2021 where issues are finally being heard. And it's not just from the majority, it's finally from the minority, right? And when I take it to our culture and our language and our identity and what's been done to us, and blood quantum, that introduction was a huge game changer as well for me when I learned of the whole blood quantum bullshit, really, is to wipe us out. So it was actually a traditional healer, and I don't mean to swear in the same sentence of speaking on, and I was not very close. I do not want to misrepresent, but we had the blessing of Harlan Downwind of being a traditional healer here in our community. And I went to go see him for some issues I was having in my life at that time. And we were in a clinical setting, and we were conversating about, he was just sharing, he was educating me, and he wasn't shaming me. I felt so seen. And he knew that I wasn't, I'm not traditional. I'm not going to pretend I'm traditional. That was not something I was taught in. The teachings I have that I carry with me, I respect and honor, and I live those best I can. But he was a man who was serving me, and he didn't treat me as if I'm a settler. He didn't treat me as if I was coming to poach. He educated me and shared with me the story of the BIA coming in and introducing blood quantum and the impacts it had on him and communities and so forth. And when I went back with the information he had shared and did some research, I was just and then I learned about the sterilizations of the 60s and 70s. And then I learned about the 60s swoop and the adoption era.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking yesteryear. I'm talking our parents, my parents' age, generations still living,
still
breathing.
Happening today. It's still happening today.
And then I learned about ICWA, and then I see the headlines on that. And I see all the faltered attacks on us all the time on our sovereignty. And then I learned that A, B, and C are happening. And what's it for? It's all for profit. It's all for power. It's all for all the unnatural, unhumanly things that we're taught to live. And in spite of what's tempted in front of us day to day, we have teachings and a way of life that teach us to be above that, but still spiritually connected to every piece of Mother Earth and doing the best we can. But to know that it's not just the violence against women, or it's not just healthcare, inadequate healthcare, or inequity in food and housing opportunity, or this and that. It's a real issue on so many levels that even our areas of focus are segregated, but there's too many traumas to respond to. That's why we have to have these separate areas of focus, like the housing inequities, food inequities, health disparities, and inadequate healthcare to brown and Black women especially. And then, the whole violence issue and the lack of success and road to justice for that, because we don't get a lot of justice within Indian country. That's just the truth. We don't. Touching on the Oliphant versus Squamish and the USAO, if you're a non-PL 280 state, and then God, I feel privileged that I live in a non-PL 280 state, because we have public law 280, which dictates like 6 states in America that they don't supersede state government and state law enforcement. They actually have to depend on that state, where we actually have that, like, the protections of the feds when they want to protect us. I mean, it's a catch-22, but it's a more, I feel, accountability, because it's under that federal lens versus like just a state governed lens. But we don't have a lot of road to success here. We don't have a lot of road to justice. A lot of victims within Indian country have to fucking chew it up, swallow it, and take it with as it is, and learn how to cope and survive within that. So you tell me, in a tribal community, when the feds are saying, okay, I'm going to use, because statistically speaking, non-Indigenous folks perpetrate violence against Indigenous folks much higher than Indigenous on Indigenous folks, right? So when a non-Native is coming in and perpetrating violence on our most vulnerable, whether it be our pregnant women, our babies, or our elders, or anyone else in between, it shouldn't matter, but it does. And our tribe's hands are freaking tied behind our back, because we have jurisdictional statute that says we do not have the inherent right to protect everybody on our tribal lands, and that we can only arrest Native on Native things, with a few exceptions in civil and whatever. What does that tell your community? We have to, nope, we're going to exist here and we have to take it. And so when we have to rely on the federal government, who sometimes have declination rates of like up to 75, 78% of what's being forwarded onto them from tribal courts and judicial systems, what does that tell these women and girls who are being raped and molested and exploited? And now we got trafficking, which is not new to Indian country. This is not a new trend. This has been going on even before the stereotype of Pocahontas. You know, everyone wants to jump on this bandwagon that's on the outskirts. Like, if you want to come help us, sit down and please listen and consult with us. But we've been surviving this for centuries, have we not? So when we really get to the nuts and bolts of this whole political game of, we have this political identity, this Indian country, you know, it's a political term, and it makes us unique for a government to government sovereign status. That's all great and dandy, but we're still a game. I'm still a pawn in a bigger picture, of which my racial identity has to be proven upon membership of my tribal card. I am still a pawn in the machine's game of my daughters, my sisters. I have nieces coming up. I have beautiful young women around me all the time, and I know what they're facing as young women. I know so where do we, instead of just sitting here and saying, you know, yeah, these things happen and boo-hoo, it's like, when are they going to stop playing with our lives? And when are they going to take us off that chessboard and put their king and queen away and say, these are people who deserve access to the same equality of law enforcement response or judicial response, or not having CPS at their door because they're a victim of domestic violence, or not having a whole other social service or a threat of your babies being ripped from you because of your racial status? Like, when do we get to just exist and be?
And part of the structure, and I'd love to have a huge conversation about this. You know, part of the structure of appropriations and getting money into Indian country and all of that, there are so many layers of it, and it can be so restrictive and restraining of what Indian country can do with that funds passed down from the feds. Or
it's also re-traumatizing. It's insulting.
So true self-determination and sovereignty would be, this is the funding that we're going to provide Indian country every year, and divvy it up. Of course, they didn't do it so well with the CARES Act funding, but I'm sure we could teach them how to do it better. And then allow us to put the funding where it needs it, so that it supports our way of life and what we want to see happen in Indian country. But there's still that idea that we're not capable of taking care of ourselves.
Okay, so I'm not gonna
and stop making it competitive, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the competitive grants.
We're all sinking in some avenue. Like, that's the thing, because that competitiveness, let's bring it back to the BIA. I mean, we could, the blood status, right? Like, we could, at every turn, we have to compete for our existence, and then it's dog eat dog. Those are atrocities that it's not fun. They consult with us. I feel I have met some great allies within the federal system, but in the same hand, as a whole, we're still too incompetent to exist and walk our own path and create our own form of justice.
And that doesn't mean that we should be terminated, right? So this is not the conversation where the federal government terminates us. That's what the Republicans were trying to do in the last administration. Let's turn them all into corporations, right? Let's turn the tribes all into corporations and absolve us of our fiduciary responsibility. No, the GDP of this country is based on the theft of lands and bodies.
Yes.
And, the relationship and the funding that we continually get is based on those takings.
I will say you're right. I'm going to agree with that and leave it there, because I'm going to paraphrase something that I don't want to butcher. So I'm just going to, yes. So a lot of people don't understand that. They don't.
No. So
they just see it as greedy.
So we know all of this stuff, and we know all the bad stuff, and we know how our communities are. And in some of our communities, even the tribal government and how leadership acts with its people is still extremely dysfunctional, suffering from historic trauma. People fight internally and
yes.
And it's not, some people say it's family kind of what is it?
Nepotism.
The Hatfields and McCoys kind of thing.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I don't know that I truly believe that. I think it's Hatfields and McCoys that were developed after 1492 and the competition of resources, because that's not the kind of people we are. We were people built out of gratitude, built in relationship, right?
Yes.
That's our values. Those are our principles. We're not the culture of take. Oh, look at what God has given us and given us dominion over. That's not who we've ever been. But yet we're still, we still kind of operate like that because that's the way how we're supposed to be because everyone else is.
Right. And let's look at how even we got to create these tribal governments, because these rights were given to us from the federal government, and we had to model off the federal government's behavior.
The Indian Reorganization Act.
Yes.
The Association on American Indian Affairs helped develop back in 1934. But it was a huge move and change from the policy that came before, which was complete assimilation and allotment. So it ended that. But it sure, didn't bring us really back to who we were.
No. And so to go back to the question a while ago about being like the white girl, there's comfort in knowing that I'm a result of, it's shitty. Like, I'm not saying, but I know I'm a result of that.
Yeah.
Right. And that the intention was for me never to reclaim my ancestral roots, to come back to our ancestral. My tribe wasn't supposed to, no tribe was supposed to succeed in where and how they are. And the older and the more educated, again, I get as well with federal recognition and lack of recognition, tribes that are still in the trenches trying to get their status recognized through the U.S. government. That breaks my heart because it's just this really, really poorly created arena that we're in. And it's on every level. It's not just identity. It's not just spirituality. It's not just economically. It is every fiber of our beings, and externally leaks into every fabric of our community blanket. You know what I mean? Of who we are. And so how do we do that community integration where the reclamation, right? But we're so accustomed to these westernized models.
Yeah.
So to take this reclamation, you have parties that are not wanting to do that. You have parties who are concerned that if we voice area of focus in one area, is it going to actually rob from what we're funded in one area? Are they going to take monies from one focus of area as a punishment because we're also shining light on others, you know? And that's the sad, hard part that I morally struggle with is there's so many areas of focus we can be advocating on, like all of Indian country. I'm not saying like myself but we are pitted on these special areas of focus. And so when does health care overrule sexual abuse? And even though they intersect, and even though they're quite connected in theory, because you have this abuse, you would think you'd go, but like when we're pitted to put other areas of focus on a priority above other priorities, it just disenfranchises the whole unit, right? And so all of this is a circle of power and control, this triangle of hierarchy of where the oppressor's up top, and then you got the middlemen, but the oppressed are always at the bottom. And holistically, altruistically, how do we come together effectively and say, this is what we need, this is why we need it, this is what you've been delivering? It falls on deaf's ear, it feels like.
Well, yeah. Colleen, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about like lateral violence, and you were just talking about, you know, looking like the white girl. And I was thinking something that I've always thought, I don't know who taught me this or where I learned it or how it came to be in my mind, in my thought process, but I always just assumed that when assimilation was happening and kids were being, you know, taken from homes and our language was being taken from us, and our ancestors were going through atrocity after atrocity and indignity, and all of these things were happening, that they prayed that one day, you know, that things would be different. They prayed for future generations. That's what we're taught to do. We pray for the next 7 generations. And I feel like I don't care what the color of my skin says. I know that my grandma and my grandpas and my aunties and my ancestors prayed for a day when I would be here advocating for the things that I'm doing now. And I know that not everyone has that like ability to think through that and look past their skin color, because trust me, hello, hi, I've definitely been on the receiving end of lateral violence. I've been told that someone once said to me, I'm an implant. I'm not from that community. I implanted there. So I know what it feels like.
I've heard that term.
I'm an implant. Well, yeah, I am. But also I am an Anishinaabe, and I know where I come from. I know where my family comes from. And I honestly, I don't know that there's a good fix for it, except for us to just stop it, right? It's ugly. And we shouldn't be we don't tolerate racism from outside of our community. We're always standing up against it. We're always speaking out against it. So why are we tolerating racism within our own communities? I don't understand.
Because it scares me to be like, hey, honestly, for me, it's so intimidating because I understand. I've lived through some shit. I've eaten some shit. I've internalized some shit. I've survived some shit. And I can probably tit for tat trauma with the best of them. And I understand, though, I wasn't always targeted based off my appearance. I was welcomed in spaces that others weren't based off their skin color. And that's where I, for myself, have to take it, because I never want to misrepresent or misspeak. I never want to come in, even with my experience of traumas, with a saviorship that, hey, I can enhance or do something greater for you that you can't do for yourself. Because what does that do? That stunts us. But how do we heal these? Because so my youngest son, you can tell he's not white. You can tell like he's something, like he's not the darkest native, but you can tell he does not look just like me, right? And so to watch him be able to freely drum with a youth drum, to watch him pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. Colleen, you were a part of this when you oversaw our cultural department at Sioux Tribe, but our youth, I don't know why I didn't go to culture camp as a kid, but my youngest sure has, and he's sure learned a lot, and he's sure benefited. And so things are changing, things are adapting or progressing. And I see it in the generation beneath me and within my own children. So my oldest wasn't exposed nearly as much as my youngest because of my own biases, my own fears and shames and hurt little feelings and feeling like I was an imposter, but always knowing like my intention was never to be. But then that's every like ally's and well, my intention's not to be this. And it's a lot, right? It's a lot to reconcile. So for me within our community, it's been really hard to talk about it, even though, again, it's like the sexual abuse thing that I was talking about. Like I grew up knowing things had happened to a lot of people around me, but today in 2021, if not every woman, a lot of women have dealt with catcalls or fear of, or some violence, physically, verbally, minimally perpetrated against them. The taboos of incest and you know, the things that keep our families and communities sick, tribal or non. I didn't know it wasn't just me. I didn't know I wasn't unique in my victimship, which is sick. I mean, I had never meant to say it, but like, you know, I didn't know it wasn't something that wasn't unique, that it like no one wants to talk about because no, we don't talk about it because it's what's maintained status quo. It is what has made this power and control effect of hierarchy has really just protected the status quo. And that's the issue. So going back to, we can use this across the board in all these areas of focus. It comes down to a hierarchy of power and control. And how do we break that? And how do we stop that? And how do I look at somebody who may have perpetrated lateral violence against me in their own fits and their own responses to traumas that I had nothing to do with, and I didn't know I hit a sore spot? And how do I look at them and say, okay, I forgive and understand? I don't verbalize that, but I have conversations with them today. I'm not afraid to approach them today. But I'm still trying to figure that out myself. How do we, because it's fearful. Like I know right now I feel I'm just chatting with two wonderful women. I know there's a lot of people who have access to this and it scares me, but I don't know how to have the lateral violence conversations in our community because there's still so much perpetrated against appearance of skin color that, but no perpetration of anything, any form of violence is great.
Right.
It changes us. It impacts us and how we choose to behave and respond. I almost walked away. I wanted to walk away from culture because of the discomfort and the lateral violence. But inherently, there's a beauty in our culture and there's a beauty in it all and the resiliency. But so yeah. Do you guys have an idea?
Yeah, well, and the way I handle it, because I know I've committed lateral violence. I think we all, if we've lived in community and, you know, it's a part of us that we have to recognize and deal with. And it comes out of feeling like you lack something, resources, lack something. It comes out of, and you guys can probably help me with this list. It comes out of fear. It comes out of angry, jealousy, all of those things, but it all is our own. Like that person who's committing lateral violence is that from that person. it's almost like, you know, how they talk about alcoholism and drug addiction, that or suicide, how you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting all of these people around you who are involved with you. You're responsible for that pain. And lateral violence is kind of like that same type of addiction, and that self-destruction is you're doing it to yourself and you're harming everyone around you. And so how do you have to find some kind of connection or healing for yourself to know that you're safe, to know that you're okay, and all of those other things that many of us didn't get when we were growing up, and be able to get it now somehow. And I know there are groups that are out there that do community healing from historic trauma. And there's a lot more of that happening now. And you know, if I had $100 million, that's where I would put all my money, is in efforts to heal from that kind of trauma, that self.
I agree with
But
that.
you know, I do want to share too. I also, in my own experience, because I we don't have enough hours this evening. In my own spiritual journeys, in my own substance abuse treatment, and all of these things, I had to learn, and I struggle. Like, I am no saint. I am no saint. Like, I am not some amazing, healed, wonderful. Any day of the week, something can trigger me. But like, that being said, I also have the wherewithal in my own autonomous self that I have to look at those who have perpetrated lateral violence against me and forgive them. And it lines with everything you were just saying, Shannon, and that healing factor. And then how do we go to that whole form of creating it so it becomes the new norm, where in a perfect world, there is not lateral violence. It's not, I'm more Native than you are, or I'm more traditional than you are, or I'm more Americanized and I'm more socialized to be inept. Like, it's not just the cultural piece. It's like the whole, I could be better than you. Look at you being a practicing Native, and I'm adhering to social standards of whiteness, like whatever that could be perpetrated against within those spaces. But it's finding the place of understanding we were all hurt. This was all created by design. And we've all survived.
Yeah, let's make sure. Lance is asking, what is lateral violence? So do we have a good definition? I can look one up. I know some places I can look that up at. What is lateral violence?
Oh, so you're going to talk so much, and then right now you're going to look at me.
Yeah. Co-host.
Well,
Wouldn't Gail and Oprah have like a card somewhere?
I sneezed so hard my earrings fell off. Just everyone,
Sorry, girl.
That would happen
out there. I just have to say that it happened. It's embarrassing. I laughed. I hope everyone else laughed. Yep, I sneezed my earrings off, but I don't actually know like a really great definition of lateral violence. I only know the experience. Like I guess I just feel like it's within your own community, and you're violent in ways that, like, almost like racism, but towards your own people.
The way I understand, the way yes, it's I don't know if this is a term. I'm not, but it's like inner racism. It's, I'm more Native than you, or I'm more of something. Okay, I'm more Native. How I've experienced is, I'm more Native than you. You are an outsider. You are not an Indigenous person. You definitely don't appear to be an Indigenous person. And I'm going to protect what I need to protect from you as the outsider who's going to come in and steal it, rob it, and internalize it and make it yours when it's not yours. But in the big picture, there's a whole beautiful array of Natives and what we look like. And as we've been talking about the last 90 minutes, created by design through the US government, and I haven't been the best on hitting like on all the policies or everything in a linear fashion, we were reduced down to feel disconnected and feel that we have to reclaim and protect and all of these things. So lateral violence is a sad.
There is,
yeah, let's just go there.
There's a great, so this is Australian and from Australian Indigenous people's work. There's a great site, look up creativespirits.info. And it has some great information about what is lateral violence. And I was just looking at this earlier. It says lateral violence is a term that describes the way people in positions of powerlessness covertly or overtly direct their dissatisfaction inward toward each other, toward themselves, and toward those less powerful than themselves. They also call it a form of bullying. Lateral violence is directed sideways, lateral, meaning the aggressors are your peers, often people in powerless positions. It's your own peers who are bullying you. Again, I'm going to cut and paste this and put it in the chat because it really is a good site and some good study that has happened there in Australia. There you go.
Yeah. It's
That's interesting that It's interesting that the definition talks about that lateral violence comes from people in powerless positions. Because I always felt like when it was happening to me that it was people who I viewed as in a position of power, at least where I was looking from.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of understand it to mean that like the community itself as a whole is disadvantaged. Right. But also like hearing it and thinking of it from my perspective, I never thought it was coming from someone who didn't have more power than me in that situation. So
well, I mean, but I think it has to be identified with the person who's committing lateral violence. They feel like they're in a position of powerlessness because of the historic trauma, right? And so that's where they're acting out from.
Oh yeah, no, I get that now. And I also see where Colleen, like if I heard you right, Colleen, I understand it's a feeling of powerlessness within the one perpetrating it. But when you're a little girl, you don't understand that. And you do look at that person who is respected within your community as having power, as having, and it was scary because I was like, oh my gosh, am I targeted now? Like, did I do something wholly disrespectful that I didn't mean to or intend to do? Have I caused, and you take those anxieties and they magnify and then they're in your head and they imprint within you. And it's very discomforting and it's not fun and it's not easy. So I'm not gonna lie, I was shitting bricks all week to come on this talk show. I'm like, I'm always like the white girl and I don't want to offend or harm anyone. So I had to like center myself and say, this is your experience and this is what happened. And this is the journey in which you found the truth of what happened, not only to your lineage, your ancestors, but truly Indian country as a whole. And through finding that truth, it helped me reclaim a little, step-by-step part of my own truth and my own access to healing. Mm-hmm. But going back to the original statement as well, Shannon, to the trauma trigger and response in the work that we do in any area of advocating, it's there. It's there. Like, I want to warn all young professionals coming in on this is some soul gutting work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because if it's not the historic, like for me as a woman in the lane that I'm in, focusing on DV, sexual assault, and everything else that's under that, I've lived through those assaults. I've lived through court systems. I've been party to multi-jurisdictional case where I had to, for sole protection of my child, signed my legal authority rights of my child to let him become ward of his tribe for them to protect us from a perpetrator. I've had to do that. And I had to have 3 different outcomes from a state court, from a federal court, and a tribal court. And let me tell you, out of all of those, that tribe did everything they could for my baby because they recognized him as one of their own, and they believed, and out of respect for so many different players here, I'm not going to identify, but they came from it in a space that was appropriate, and they used their sovereignty to do so. Unfortunately, the government's idea of a successful conviction does not necessarily coincide with that of a community, let alone the victim or the victims it's perpetrated against. Mm-hmm. So when you're in a ICWA case a lot longer than your perpetrators in prison in the federal system after being promised A, B, and C in 25 plus years, that's disheartening. And then when you do this work to advocate for better outcomes, but yet you're becoming part of an outcome that's not a better outcome for anyone involved except for the perpetrator and the government, that's disheartening. And I'm going to take it a step further. My mother was killed by law enforcement in Northern California in 2018. And so I've been very trying to stay away from the news this week. I've been trying to stay, you want to talk re-triggering, every day cops are killing Black people. Every day cops are killing minorities. White people too are killed. My mother, though she's a descendant of a nation, she doesn't have ties and community ties to the tribe that she's a descendant from. So she was mentally ill and impoverished. She falls under those two categories. And no justice because the cops already had qualified immunity from the minute they pulled their freaking gun out and killed her within 11 seconds. And I'm not saying it was 11 seconds like, hey, here's my lighter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going to light it. It was 11 seconds from the time that guy got out of the car to the time she was dead. So, and it's very similar to the most recent case with a young man out of Minnesota using a vehicle. He was not causing harm. He was running from police. And still have to stand up and advocate for the greater good that I believe we can accomplish. But how do we get there? Because right now what we're seeing in society is trauma, trauma, trauma. We are seeing political games being played on whatever side of the aisle people want to identify. But until we have a full sovereign fix, a full Oliphant fix, a full transparency into what is going on and how things operate within our communities, in our urban settings as well, we're not going to be able to fully heal on that whole axle that we need to be functioning at. But no one wants to hear it. And in my unique position of, I went from doing like macro, micro work and all of this stuff, and now I get to understand policy and why we have the policies we do and where we get the appropriations for money and grant funding in response to the high rates of violence that we see. It all goes back to law, and it all goes back to an influence of power and times that don't. So the immunity clause in California, that was written in the 1800s. That does not fit into their society of 2021, but yet that's the gold standard they use for qualified immunity. And then take that a step further. Why don't we have our full sovereignty? Why are we still looked at that we have to be protected under the wing of the United States government? Mm-hmm. And it goes back to law, and it goes back to power and control. And how do we collectively come together to address that? Because if we can address one of these areas successfully, areas of focus successfully, we can do that in all the others. Or why not demand it all at once? I know in a perfect world that when it happened, I know in a perfect world, each tribe has its own federal sovereign status, their own economic opportune or lack of opportune. I know there's regional influence where, I'm by the Great Lakes. There's tribes down or Pueblos down where there's differences. And I understand that with that comes our unique infrastructures and how we do operate and what our needs are to reflect who we are, unique to our tribes. Nonetheless, in the greater good, we see the atrocities going up with the Alaska Native sisters and their lack of full support. And we see what's going on in Southwest. But, it's going on everywhere. It's going on everywhere. And how do we respond to that collectively? How do we come up and heal and say enough's enough? Because we're up against a machine that has centuries of practice and centuries of opportune and centuries of shape shifting into who they want us to think they are.
Wait a minute. Look who we are. Look at our ancestry and our connection to this place. That's why we're still here. Those machines haven't, and another way of looking at it, Hallie, is those machines haven't worked because we're still here. We may not be whole. We may be, lost a foot or two, but we're still here. And so, and this place is still here and capable of being healed. So I think we have to, we've got to acknowledge all the shit. But at the same time, the only way to get through it all is to remember that we're still here. And that the things that we have going in Indian country now, the people like you all who are educated and carrying on building language competency, building cultural competency within your communities, that's going to, project us forward. Stronger than us waiting for the feds to freaking do anything.
Right.
I mean, even though I'm grateful that Deb Haaland is our Interior Secretary, how wonderful is that? I know that change is extremely slow.
Yes.
There, but this has been such a powerful conversation, and I know that we're going at it for almost 2 hours, and I have a feeling like we could go at it for another 2 hours. So
we could, but
commitment right here. Do we want to go at it for another 2 hours, or?
I'll take your cue.
I'll go get a snack.
Right?
I'll go get a snack while you're eating.
Yeah.
And hang out.
I think we should answer Lance's question.
Okay, Lance.
I don't see questions, so I apologize.
This is a good one, and I've been thinking about this for a couple minutes because it came up a few minutes ago, and I was thinking about how so a small amount of shame. You're right, Lance, is embedded in our culture, and I'll give you an example. One time I was helping cook for a funeral, and it was a very important funeral. It was a very traditional funeral, so full 4-day traditional funeral. And I showed up late, and I was eating this blueberry muffin because I hadn't ate yet. And there was this auntie in the kitchen who just turned her head, and she just looked at me, and within 2 seconds of just locking eyes with her, I threw that muffin away, and I was over at a pan cooking. And I was like, she just shamed me out of my muffin. And I didn't realize for the longest time it was kind of funny to me, but at the same time it's I think there's a really good lesson that I learned in that moment, that my needs were not more important than what needed to happen there. And I was being a jerk, and she just let me know within a look. And I think there's a healthy amount of shame in our communities, but then there's also people who take it above what is needed to tell or teach the lesson, right? So I don't know how you can avoid it other than seeking out the people who will do it in a better way, who will shame you in a nice way than the people who will
shame you just to be harmful, to exploit it. I was over on Mary Culture Camp. And I think it was the UpFab's women gathering that we got to do in 2019 before the world changed. And I was pointing because I'm a pointer. And my homie Kim from across the river was like, "Girl, you do not point. Can you stop? Well, I don't have lips. They're." So I'm like, okay. But she didn't do it in a way to shame me in a harmful manner, and she gently reminded me throughout our time together that weekend. And then we were in close space together again a few weeks later, and she had to remind me. And there is a level of healthy shame with that. And I know you can't act any old ways, but there's a way that you do that and teach, because on the flip side of that shame, and I know we have to, like, what did the boarding school era, one of the biggest eras of impact on us, and it's not the only, teach us? It taught us to internalize our feelings and our traumas. And that came out in what? Shame, lack of knowing how to cope healthily, lack of, they were not nurtured. Children were not nurtured. They were industrialized. They were assimilated. They were exploited. And so I think there's a unique relationship with shame and a healthy balance of our teachings and lessons where it's deemed appropriate. But it's also something that's just really, really integrated into those impacted by that shame. And to not just focus, Shannon, on like the ugliness and everything of what I've covered today, but that's where I was going. How do we get to this place of reconciliation on our own individual, spiritual, physical levels, but collectively to get here? Will there be a day, I don't think in my lifetime, but maybe grandchildren's, my children or future grandchildren I may have, if I'm blessed to have grandchildren, in their lifetime, maybe they won't have to ask. Maybe they will just get to be and exist as the people of who they were prior to this, and the resiliency that I see in our youth, because our youth have it very hard. And then what do our youth do? They grow up and they become adults. And do those patterns repeat themselves? So does the historical traumas still get in and have access points into the current generations and those yet to come? So that's my hope, is that somehow, some way, collectively, we can all get to this place of self and community and spiritual healing and existence, and full sovereignty, full use of our inherent sovereign rights. So
Yes. Yes.
I think language and culture is such a large part of that too.
Well, that's a whole other thing too, is the whole disconnect from that. And going back to where I've had people say, well, you're not even Native. And it's like, yeah, because that's the result. Go work for the other side. Like that's the result. It's all created by design. And so how do we reclaim that? And I thought something was just really wrong with me for not knowing these things. But like, when you're a kid, you think of weird shit and you don't know how it necessarily fits in the real world yet. But I didn't understand what was stolen from us for so long. And really, truly, 1978 was that I don't want to say jumping off point, was the opening of finally being able to exist without that fear of prosecution. Though I know we had individuals, obviously, who maintained practice of culture and tradition, but it wasn't for all. And it was probably hard to access and hard to protect. And I can only imagine those who sacrificed themselves to maintain that. So and tying it into my youngest son, who has free opportunity to exist and to learn all of these things that go into him as an Anishinaabe, and keeping that access alive and those teachings into what's yet to come.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to remember that we were danced back, prayed back, and that we're here for a reason, that we're sacred, that we're accountable and responsible to ourselves and one another. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's one of the strongest mantra, or whatever you want to call it, I can say to myself when it's hard, is that you're all sacred. Everything is sacred. Everything is sacred. And I'm accountable for my actions today. I'm accountable for what I do next in this moment. Mm-hmm. Sometimes all you can do is breathe.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and what we can do even better than that is to be grateful that we can breathe, right?
And exist.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Anyone got a joke?
I'm
no jokes. Come on.
I'm not that funny.
Friday night.
I think I am.
Yeah, I know. I think I am too, but I find out that I'm not, but oh well.
You just reminded me of my dad. He used to always say that. He'd go, "Hey, do you know any good jokes?" Like that was like his line to ask anyone. It's pretty good. I never know any jokes. I read a joke today and I can't even remember it. I got nothing.
Well, that's not good. Well, let's put this up. So Cora Lemons, I think you might know who Cora Lemons is. It's a very ancient saying, but a true and honest thought that when you become a teacher by your students, you'll be taught. Thank you so much, Hallie.
Cora Lemons, the lemonator of Sioux Township. She was not one of my Indigenous-based teachers, but she was a phenomenal teacher and has been a phenomenal. Miss Lemons, I love you. I don't know if she's on. I don't know how.
She's been chatting and commenting. Yes.
Oh, McWetch, like she's just she's one of those real deals as well, you know, and she's genuinely invested in her students throughout decades. Like I'm just fortunate that I was able to get in there. I only had her for half a semester when I left. I left the tribal school because of bullying and went to a different a public school, and that was my teacher for the last 6 months of that year, or half a year. So
wow.
That's nice. That also reminds me of, to be the teacher, you must be the student. It's like the same concept.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and you know, in her own way, she's taught resilience because she was responding to a lot of us as kids who were going through our own things at home, and I can't speak for every home, but looking back, it's, you know, the social construct of racism and the social construct of who gets to deem what's socially appropriate and not are huge issues, and it's impacted lives and generations for centuries. Mm-hmm. And to have those people who have been in my life who have challenged me, either what I thought, you know, because I thought I knew everything back then, and to teach me the humility and wisdom. I'm very grateful for those players in my life. And there's a lot of them. I've touched a little on my mom, the abandonment, and my mom was sick. Same with those in our community. My mother suffered from mental health and trauma, and those needs weren't met, especially in the era in which she was raised, you know, early 60s and so forth. And so looking back and coming up on her anniversary, and Mother's Day is coming up, and May 5th here in America is our day of recognition and awareness for the MMIW crisis. That also happens to be my mom's birth date. So all this time of year is very hard for me, very, very hard for me. But I have been continuously blessed with the best matriarchs, even starting with my biological mother, the woman who gave me life. But I have been so blessed. And that's something that, we have our auntie jokes, and they crack me up. And I'm like, when do I get my auntie card? Like, I am an auntie. I know I'm an auntie, but like, there's just some really cool aunties out there who I want to like kick it with. But like, there's just something there's highlight of the matriarchal societies and respect and the reclamation of that too. But the beauty, can we just talk about the beauty of being a matriarch or being raised by or being touched by? And my gratitude for that is because no matter the community, no matter the school, no matter the neighborhood mom, I've had some of the best mothers in my life, and I'm just so grateful for that. And Miss Lemons, if you're still on, that extends to you as well, and I hope you know that. So,
oh, wonderful. Okay, now I'm gonna go write a letter to my grandmother because this is making me miss her very much.
All right.
But thank you, Hallie, so much for joining us during this time. I know it's a difficult time for you. We wish you all the best and all the best blessings. And I know you and Colleen have known each other for a while, but please consider me a friend, and yes. Love our conversations, and I'm looking forward to more of them in the future.
I hope I was a little more easier tonight than it was.
No, you're wonderful, Hallie. You're wonderful.
Great.
Don't do any kind of, self-harm.
Yes.
What was that you were saying? You were
Colleen?
saying something smart about that, Colleen, when
2021.
I was like, it's 2021. We are no longer self-doubting. Okay.
Yes.
We left that in 2020.
Self-doubting is not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
So thank you, HALI. And we're going to keep you up or keep you on unless you want to just head out. I think Colleen and I have some just closing stuff that we want to share. Right, Colleen?
Oh, no, if it's a great time for me to segue out, that's fine. If you want me on, I can, like, honestly, I'm a loser. This is what I do. I'm on TikTok learning from like the young kids. Yes. I love TikTok. I wish I was 10 years younger to be a content creator. It's just not socially appropriate today, I think. But
there's grandmas and aunties and uncles on there.
It's educate. Okay. Can I plug this real quick? Yeah. And I promise I'll just shut up and put exhausting space. But TikTok has taught me so much, not just about my own culture, but the other bands, the other regions. And it's it's the 7th generation coming through and like teaching us and protecting their water and their women and their children and saying, listen, this is the story of my mom or my auntie or a community member who's gone missing. And it's connecting to the other youth and those who are willing to be educated today. And it's the internet. There's so much bad. There's so much bad. And I know TikTok was like a political whatever. But I will just say this, like it's taught me so much. So if I wasn't on here, I'd probably be watching some cute little res kids teaching us about their dogs or beading. Like there's always how to bead or stories about Oliphant, stories about the historical context and policies that have led to the results of modern day society. So it's just for me, it's been educational, and I low key, like, I think they say like it slaps or something. I don't know. I'm not cool. Whatever the kids would say, I would say. I like TikTok.
And be sure you check out our TikTok.
I will.
Yes, we are the Association on American Indian Affairs is on TikTok. And Colleen even is on one of our TikToks. Yeah.
No, she is, because but I think it was on a different social media platform. Did I message you and I was like, is this your voice? I hadn't seen like a text. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, you did. There's we have some really nice videos on there about just like issues in Indian country.
That's good to know.
Tell your son and all his friends to like the association's TikTok.
Yeah. And let them know if they want to do some creation for us.
Well, I would love to, but we're taking a break from smartphones and apps in my house. Oh. Yeah. TikTok.
Yeah.
So it could be a catch-22.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're calling out anyone who wants to help us with TikTok creation. We're doing more of that. We're also calling all Indigenous artists. Submissions are due April 19th, right? Coming up next week. Yep. For a graphic logo to help represent our repatriation conference, our annual repatriation conferences. And there's $1,000. Whoever's art we use, we're paying you for it. So go to our website, indian-affairs.org/repatriation conference, and you can get more information about our call for Indigenous artists. Liked how I slipped that one in there.
Love it.
Anything else we got, Colleen, that we want to share with people? Remind them.
I don't know if we want to share this or not, but I think it's really cool to just say that we have a new employee.
Oh, yes.
Me too. We have a new public outreach.
I am so inundated with Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah.
Who is it?
Yeah. I screwed up the job title, so I am the worst. But I was trying to say we have a new public affairs outreach coordinator. And her name is Caitlin Leonard, and she's also a Sioux Tribe member.
Yes, yes, yes.
She's
The
fantastic.
association is being taken over.
I did not know that when I met her the other day. All right.
She actually worked in Sioux Tribe Language and Cultural Department for a little while too.
Oh, how
So
was
she
okay.
was up in the Sioux for a little while, yeah.
Yeah. And then we're going to be announcing a new office manager soon. We'll announce her next week.
We're taking over.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she won't be Sault Ste. Marie, but she's from up north.
I meant the association. We're taking over.
Yes. Well, it's been amazing tonight. I've really enjoyed having you, Hallie. It's been a great discussion. Colleen, you're always wonderful. So glad that you're a partner with me in all of this historic trauma that we get to deal with. Colleen dug me out of a hole this week. I'm very grateful for her. Next week, I think our guest, I think we're going to do these every Friday now. I think Friday seems to be a good day. Everyone's getting off work a little more relaxed and chill. Mishwana Goman, who teaches women's studies at UCLA. So more women's studies. Sorry, guys, Roy's not here, so it's more women's stuff. Is going to be with us, I think, next week. We'll just continue with more Red Hoop talk. And everyone have a wonderful Friday evening. What do you think, guys? Anything else?
I just want to say miigwech for the opportunity, and sorry for awkwardly. I just didn't want to hop off during your announcement, so I'm like, I'll roll it out. No, just miigwech for this opportunity to share and talk about some of my experiences, and I look forward to future work. You know, some stuff we've talked behind the scenes, so I look forward to that potential. And Shannon, please also think of me as a friend.
Absolutely.
Sorry. There's a good joke in the chat. That was pretty good. Sorry.
Oh, wait.
Here's a good joke. That's pretty good. I like that.
Well, you got to say it because not everyone is actually watching the video. So say the joke, Colleen, and then we'll close out. What's the joke?
All right. So I'm terrible at telling jokes. I always laugh. It says, what do you call a sad strawberry? A blueberry. I don't know why. I think
blueberry.
That's pretty good.
That is
very good. And so, with that, I think we're going to close up shop tonight. Happy Friday. Thank you, Association on American Indian Affairs, for making Red Hoop possible. Everyone, please comment, like, subscribe, and all of that stuff. Please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe and give us a couple of likes. Let us know what you want to see on air. All right. We'll talk to everyone next week.
Hey.